Well, good evening, and thank you all for coming. And let me begin by thanking the Philadelphia Public Library and the folks at Penn Press for putting this together. It's interesting, I've served in 3 cities, and I think it's only fitting to kick off this book tour in the city of Philadelphia. Even though I spent a lot more time in New York, obviously, Philadelphia and Ed Rendell really gave me my start. People ask me, really it's the opening line of the book, did you always want to be a cop? And most chiefs will tell you, yes, from the time I was in grade school, that's all I ever wanted to be. Not in my case. I did not like police officers growing up in Washington Heights. As a matter of fact, I didn't like it when I was growing up in Dublin, Ireland, before I came to Washington Heights in 1961. They were like parents and teachers. They told you all the things you couldn't do. They arbitrarily took stickball bats from you on 175th Street just because Miss Lemondrops was complaining that we were hitting the Spaldings against her window. And so, didn't like police officers. However, a group of friends of mine that I grew up with, went to high school with, all took the police officer's exam in 1967 and entered en masse to the NYPD. And while I didn't like being a police officer, within 3-4 weeks at the most, that began what is up to this time a 40-year love affair with a profession that not only have I come to love, admire, and brag about, but I've also been fortunate to live through some tumultuous times and seeing the process of change over those 40 years. I won't go into detail in the last chapter of the book, but it may be, from my opinion, the most important chapter. I'll leave it up to you to read it, but it's a chapter on race and policing. There are 3 sections of the book, obviously, New York, Philadelphia, and Miami, but the issue of race and policing, covers not just those 3 cities, but every city in America. And when you look back, when I came on as a young man in 1967 in the NYPD, was a majority male, white organization, and to see the transition over the next 30 or 40 years, not just in that department, but in departments across America, not, by the way, not willingly, but being pushed, shoved, and sometimes sued as a result of the grievances coming out of the 60s, the Vietnam protests, civil rights movement, etc. And so my favorite chapter is the last chapter because we've come such a far way. We have integrated police departments all across America. In fact, the Philadelphia Police Department, as far as reflecting the population it serves, is one of the leading departments in that area. And so when you look at the whole issue of integration, it strikes me as ironic that the 2 most conservative institutions in our society, the police and the military, have made the most progress in integration and getting a well-integrated workforce. But you read more in the chapter. The chapter concludes, interestingly enough, this year, one with the remarks made by a good friend of mine, Eric Holder. He was telling the truth, but he chose words that I probably wouldn't choose. Talked about this being a nation of cowards refusing or unwilling to discuss the issue of race. He took a lot of flack for that. And I had a meeting privately in Washington with him, and I told him, you said the right thing. But he took such a beating. We wanted him to speak more on that, us at the Police Executive Research Forum, and he took a pass. But anyway, fast forward 4 months after that, we had a post-racial president and a post-racial society get involved in a racial incident referring to the Cambridge Police Department as having acted stupid in the arrest of Professor Gates. And so even the president, who had run a tremendous campaign staying above the fray, even he too got dragged into this issue of race in society. Finally, on the comment, it's interesting. When I was going to college in the early 70s, and for whatever reason, I took a weekend to read de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. It's a fantastic book, written by a Frenchman in 1828, and he talks about this new American society and how great it is and all the opportunities, and he goes on and talks about how it's structured, and this is the new, if you will, the new nirvana. This is where it's happening. This is what the future looks like. There's one problem, though. He says the Achilles heel, if you will, of American society and the whole issue of race. And how would they deal with the issue of the races, the mixing of the races going forward? He thought pretty prophetically that would be, and of course it did become an issue, certainly into the 20th century. But having been managed, I think, pretty well in the 60s and 70s, to today, you wouldn't recognize today what existed 40 years ago. But nonetheless, there's still some place to go, some more room for improvement, if you will. In any event, it is great to be here in Philadelphia. It's, as I said, Ed Rendell gave me my opportunity back in the beginning of 1998 when he hired me as the police commissioner on his final 2 years. And there was no expectation on my part that I would stay more than 2 years. Every mayor has the right to have his own police commissioner. And so my sense was I had a 2-year window to institute the reforms I had in mind, and we went about that rather aggressively, dealing with a whole host of issues, most obvious, crime, but also issues of within the department on the reporting of crime. Those of you that are veteran readers of the Philadelphia Inquirer can remember the series that must have gone on. Well, it felt like it went on for an eternity, but it actually went on for about 1.5 years as they were striving for their Pulitzer Prize. They actually did a very good job of uncovering the deficiencies of the Philadelphia Police Department in reporting crime, especially in the area of sexual battery. And it was a tough time, and it's tough to be in an organization that feels like it's under assault. But nonetheless, we moved ahead and took a great deal of satisfaction in a Newsweek article some years later titled From National Disgrace to National Model. And while we made lots of changes in the area of deadly physical force and a whole host of things, I think I was most proud of how we went about fixing the sexual battery unit in the Philadelphia Police Department and really regaining the confidence of women in this community. Because there were, and the Philadelphia Inquirer outlined them in graphic fashion, some outrageous cases. In any event, at the end of it, I put together a committee because even though we'd made the changes, and Timoney said he made the changes, and therefore the changes were made, that wasn't enough. There were still issues of confidence. And so I established a team, or a group, a committee, if you will, made up mostly of lawyers, male and female. And I gave them the power that most committees, oversight committees, wouldn't have, because I thought it was so necessary at the time. And this committee served the function of reviewing the investigations of detectives. And they could say yay or nay, and if they didn't like the investigation or thought some more investigatory steps should be taken, they could bring it to the attention of the commanding officer of the sexual battery unit. And if they weren't satisfied with that, they could take it directly to me. And it's covered at great length in the book. But the reason I mentioned the story, when I got to Philadelphia, I kept hearing about it's a small town. It's a group of neighborhoods, and you get to know them. How can it be a small town? It's like 1.5, 1.6 million people. Well, it is. I was heading down this morning to do NPR, and I'm walking down Chestnut Street, just a regular morning, and I run into a woman, Tracy, and I'm drawing a blank on her last name, it'll come to me in a second, who has been a woman's advocate who, back then in 1998, was leading the charge, her and some other women, on reforming the Philadelphia Police Department. And she was a member of that committee that I established. And what often happens in policing. I'm assuming it happens everywhere else. You put together a committee, they meet 2 or 3 times, and then it lacks energy, it lacks focus, and it just drifts.